The Brony International Guard by Psycicscubadiver. The Big Comes to Town. Part 2.
Next chance I get,
Twilight gasped.
I'm learning the long-distance version of that teleport spell.
At least there hadn't been any more surprises on the way here. In fact, Twilight was pleased to note that there weren't any humans around the outside of Fluttershy's cottage. Just the usual menagerie of animals. It was good to see that she'd beat them there. She could explain the situation to Fluttershy and help her deal with the humans when they did show up. Twilight waited until her breathing was back to normal and walked up to the door. She was about to knock when she heard a voice from inside. Twilight paused, frowning. That voice didn't sound like Fluttershy's. Fearing the worst, Twilight banged on the door.
Fluttershy, are you home?
There was a nervous squeak that could only be Fluttershy and the sound of a lot of hurried movement. After almost a minute of listening to that nonsense, Twilight was debating between knocking again and simply breaking the door down. Before she could decide, the door opened a crack, and Fluttershy peered through the narrow opening.
Oh, hello, Twilight. Did you need anything?
Fluttershy was acting more timid than usual. Twilight knew something was up in that cottage, but what? Her mind flashed unbidden due to the worst possibilities. Twilight shook her head, willing away the thought, but all the same, it wouldn't hurt to be sure.
Fluttershy,
Twilight said, dropping her voice to an almost inaudible level.
Blink twice if you aren't free to speak and need my help. What?
Fluttershy stared at her in confusion.
Why wouldn't I be able to speak with you? I'm doing it right now.
Twilight face-huffed and managed not to sigh. Returning to her normal voice, she asked plainly,
Can I come inside, Fluttershy?
The yellow Pegasus looked over her shoulder quickly and then darted back to Twilight.
That wouldn't be a good idea. We could talk outside if you don't mind.
There was the faintest sound of more movement inside. Twilight wasn't an animal expert, but whatever it was sounded a lot bigger than any of her friends' pets. There weren't a lot of possibilities for a creature that size, and Twilight was sure what it was.
Fluttershy,
she said, staring at her friend sternly,
are you hiding something from me?
The shy Pegasus eeped softly and mumbled something. Twilight sighed.
Fluttershy, are you hiding a bunch of humans in your living room?
Fluttershy's jaw fell open, and she could barely manage to speak.
How could you tell?
Twilight rolled her eyes.
Thus far, they've shown at every pony's I've visited. I couldn't think of anything else it might be.
She paused, frowning.
Why did you want to hide them? I would have thought you'd want my help.
Fluttershy blushed, opened the door, and let her friend in.
Well, it's just, I thought you might be mad.
She turned to the rest of the room and softly called out,
It's okay. You can all come out now.
Twilight watched in amusement as the humans came out of their impromptu hiding spots. Most of them were painfully obvious, like the one beneath the couch or behind the curtains, but some were impressive, like the human who somehow managed to fit inside one of Fluttershy's cabinets. Once assembled, dressed in the expected yellow shirts, they waited for further direction. Fluttershy coughed delicately.
Do any of you mind making tea for Twilight?
Two humans nodded and disappeared into the kitchen, the taller one bumping his head on the door jamb.
So, why did you want to stop by, Twilight? Is Aloysius all right?
Twilight waved the question away, taking a seat on the sofa.
He's fine. I came here because I wanted to warn you about the humans in town, but it looks like you've already met them.
Fluttershy smiled and blushed slightly, eliciting a soft daw from the humans. Twilight wanted to pursue that tangent, but Fluttershy was already speaking.
Well, it was just one at first, and even then, I was really nervous, but he had a poor little doggy that needed my help. We worked together for a little bit, and then he asked me if he could introduce me to his friends. And then we met another of his friends, and another. I was really nervous, but I did what Dashy said and acted assertive.
Wearing what she probably thought was a fierce smile, Fluttershy stomped a hoof down to punctuate her statement. The stomp, though, was so light it barely raised a tiny puff of dust. This action was met by the humans with some of the goofiest smiles Twilight had ever seen. Spike had looked less ridiculous when Twilight caught him flexing in front of the mirror. But Fluttershy had her back to them, and was unaware of the melted hearts, and brains, in Twilight's opinions, behind her.
And here's the best part, Twilight. They want to stay here and help me take care of all the animals in Ponyville. Oh, we'll be able to help so many poor bunnies and birdies than I could ever on my own. Isn't that just great?
Twilight forced a smile, trying to be happy for her friend.
That does sound great, Fluttershy, but how will you afford it? Caring for that many animals couldn't be cheap.
Oh,
Fluttershy's shoulders slumped, and she stared at the floor.
I hadn't thought about that.
The Pegasus sniffed softly, and Twilight had to deal with guilt on one front and glares of the assembled humans on the other. The front human cleared his throat and stepped forward. He adjusted his glasses and spoke in a quiet tone. If I could say something?
Of course.
Fluttershy said, and then sat bolt upright.
Oh, where are my manners? I forgot to introduce everyone.
She nodded to Twilight.
Twilight, this is Connor, the division leader. Connor, this is Twilight, my friend and Ponyville's librarian.
Connor gave a small bow, and Twilight nodded in response.
Twilight, this is Chris.
Fluttershy introduced all 25 humans, and Twilight tried not to yawn. At least her tea had arrived halfway through. She had to admit the blend was very tasty. I wonder if any of my humans can brew like this. Wait, did she just think of them as her humans? You can't get attached to them. They are not staying, she told herself sternly. Eventually, Fluttershy finished, and Twilight nodded awkwardly, trying to pretend she'd been paying attention. The Pegasus turned to the human still standing beside her. Sorry I interrupted. What did you want to say? He adjusted his glasses again and smiled. Just that you don't need to worry about the cost. The Big has more than enough to pay for all the extra animals. We wouldn't want to be a burden to any pony.
Really?
Fluttershy asked, her eyes widening and a shy smile glowing on her face. Really, really, he replied. Fluttershy smiled widely, giving a small squeak as she did, and clapped her front hooves together in joy. The humans treated Twilight to another round of sappy expressions, and she fought the urge to roll her eyes. Still, she had more questions yet unanswered.
So, where are you all planning to live? I don't think there's anywhere in Ponyville with enough room to house all of you.
We're camped out in some fields north of town, but that's just until we can get some proper barracks built. I think the boss man should be taking the construction company and giving them the down payment today, Connor replied. Fluttershy frowned.
Oh, you poor dears. You could stay here. I wouldn't mind.
A look of temptation washed across the face of every human there. Connor seemed more tempted than any of them, but he sighed and shook his head. No, thank you. We don't want to be a burden to any pony, and the weather's scheduled to be fine. Twilight, meanwhile, was busy running figures through her mind. She shook her head, and it just wasn't adding up. Even if the humans supplied their own labor, went with the cheapest material, and made their barracks as Spartan as possible, the cost would still be too large to house that many. And it wasn't like any of them would have paying jobs, not to mention their offer to provide for all of Fluttershy's new animals. How the hay did they expect to pay for everything? Puzzled, she put the question to the division leader. He shrugged. All the finances are being handled by the Rarities Division. I'm afraid you have to ask them about it. Twilight frowned. She had planned on visiting Rarity anyway, but she hated the delay. But that brought another question to her mind.
Just who are all the divisions sworn to? If there's 25 of you in each, and 250 total, there must be 10 divisions. The elements of harmony only account for 6 of those.
Connor nodded. You're right. We had a lot of choices, but we narrowed it down to just 10 ponies. It disappointed some people, but we didn't want to bring along too many. Like you said, we've got divisions devoted to each of the elements. And then we've got Trixie's divisions.
Wait, Trixie interrupted. There's a Trixie division? As in the showmare who called herself the Great and Powerful Trixie?
Yep, he replied. The boss man wanted to head up that one, but we convinced him to stay in Ponyville. And then we've got the Derby Hooves group.
Derby?
Fluttershy squeaked and then blushed.
Oh, sorry. I was just, kind of surprised.
Twilight nodded in agreement. She had thought that the group dedicated to Trixie was the most ridiculous thing the humans could have come up with. But this took the cake. It wasn't that she didn't like Derby, but the scatterbrained Pegasus needed help looking after her own foal. Imagining her in charge of a quasi-military group of foreign creatures was difficult, to say the least.
Not to be rude, but why her?
Twilight's eyes narrowed.
If you're doing it just to be mean, I will remove you from Ponyville myself.
The way she glared left no doubt that she wasn't talking about telling the princesses. Connor gulped audibly and held his hands in a pulsating gesture. Not at all. We love Derpy because she reminds us that no matter how bad things seem or how badly we mess up, you have to stay positive. Nothing seems to go her way, but that never stops her from trying her best. Twilight sat back and considered the surprisingly deep answer. That's, she began, something I never thought about before. I guess she really does deserve her own group of fans. And the fact that she's absolutely adorable every time she derps helps. Connor grinned, and the rest of the humans murmured their agreement. Twilight sighed. The humans seemed to swing wildly between bizarrely wise and just plain bizarre. Alright, I guess I'll be going then. I just wanted to check on you, Fluttershy, and everything seems fine.
It was my pleasure, Twilight.
Fluttershy answered.
I always enjoy when my friends stop by.
Twilight hugged her briefly and rose to go. She was just about to walk out the door when a nagging thought reminded her she'd forgotten something. One last thing before I go. Why were you afraid I'd be mad if I found out about all of your humans? Fluttershy studied her hooves.
Well, one of the humans from Pinky's group stopped by to deliver invitations to her party this Saturday. He said it would probably be better if they hid from you if you came by. It was something about,
She turned to another human.
What was it called, Chris?
Reaction Scenario 15. Twilight's expression froze, and she softly shut the door. The barrier, however, wasn't thick enough to stop those inside the cottage from hearing an angry tirade, of which the words cryptic, apes, and a large amount of curses were the main components.
Please, Spike, just this once. For me.
Spike hadn't known what to expect when the human had dragged him into the dark closet. But it wasn't this. She was insistent, though, and Spike was starting to get uncomfortable. I don't know, he said. I mean, you've got to admit, it's kind of odd. I guess you're right. I just really... Never mind. She slumped, and Spike felt his more chivalrous side rear its head. She wasn't Rarity, or even a pony, but a gentle coat didn't hurt the feelings of any lady. I suppose I could. Her face lit up, and even in the darkness, Spike could hear her smile. But only if it's just this once, agreed? She had nodded happily, and he sighed. Well, let's do this. He reached down and grabbed a piece of paper and a quill. Dear Princess Celestia, the human began. Twilight took her time getting to Rarity's. She wasn't in a hurry this time, and truth be told, she was still tired from her running earlier. Carousel Boutique looked the same as always, but at this point Twilight would have been surprised if it wasn't full of humans. One knock at the door later, and her cynicism was justified. Not that the meeting was entirely without surprise, though. All of the other humans had worn simple, short-sleeved shirts and rough pants in various shades of blue. While the shirt this human was wearing matched her chosen pony, the similarities ended there. The shirt was a long-sleeved button-down and appeared to be made of silk. Instead of pants, the human wore a long skirt of jet black. The whole outfit was completed by a black bow tie and a bowler hat. Twilight knew she wasn't very aware when it came to fashion, but even she could tell this human's outfit was a cut above that of her peers. Welcome, Lady Twilight, to Carousel Boutique, where every item is chic, unique, and magnifique. Are you here to see Lady Rarity? Yes, please. The human bowed again before holding open the door for her. Twilight fought back a sigh. Of course, Rarity's division would be even more prim and mannerly than any of the others. The inside of the shop was humming with activity. 3 pairs of humans were working on new dresses. Another set were organizing and inspecting an array of fabrics. A close-knit group was arguing over a set of designs. 2 more were sketching, a trio was knitting and gossiping, and one lone human was examining and categorizing Rarity's extensive collection of gems. Instead of the uniformity she found in every other group, no 2 of these humans were dressed alike. They all wore something white, but that was the only thing that linked them. Every piece of their clothing, though, was immaculate, and Twilight suspected Rarity had a hoof in their attire. Lady Rarity, Lady Twilight is here to see you, announced the human who led Twilight in. I'll be down in just a moment, darling. There followed some rustling, a few moments of silence, and Rarity called out again. Tell me what you think, Twilight. I want your honest opinion. Twilight was speechless, a reaction she thought she was past at this point. Rarity looked like an empress of ancient Rome. Her toga was an ivory white, hemmed in gold, and fit perfectly. Various pieces of jewelry, all of it done in gold and opal, shone from her throat, horn, and hooves. However, she was not walking down the stairs in the unbelievable outfit. She was lounging on a curtained palanquin being carried by 4 humans. They were dressed solely in white kilts, the traditional Roman outfit for servants, and somehow they managed to hold the platform perfectly level as they descended the stairs.
Well, out with it. How does it look?
Rarity asked, her eyes shining. Only Twilight's years of mental discipline allowed her to work past the impossibility of the situation and respond.
Don't, you think it's a bit tasteless? Flashy?
Twilight forced a smile, trying not to hurt her friend's feelings. Rarity, though, just tittered.
Darling, the point of a costume party is to look flashy.
She paused, considering the purple unicorn's expression.
Didn't you get your invitation to Pinky's party? Maybe she made a mistake, sending runners instead of going herself. Though I imagine planning the event is leading her short on time.
Twilight shook her head.
Pinky's throwing a costume party for all the humans in town? I knew she was planning something earlier, but I didn't expect her to work that fast. Oh, I know, Rarity agreed. But what brings you to my humble shop? I thought you wanted me to make your costume, but since you didn't know, that can't be it.
Twilight nodded.
Actually, I've been trying to find out more about the humans, and I was told your division handles their finances. Is their division leader here?
That would be me. What do you need? Asked the human carrying the front right of Rarity's palanquin. Twilight stared at him.
Thanks. I'm Twilight.
Nice to meet you, he said, smiling. You can call me
Lady Rarity,
called out one of the humans, discussing the designs. Can we get your input on this? We seem to have hit a snag.
Of course. Put me down, please, gentle colts.
She nodded to Twilight.
Maybe after you're done talking to him, we can discuss your costume. I've got some ideas that you would look simply fabulous in.
Twilight smiled and nodded, trying to think of something that would excuse her from whatever plans the fashionista was hashing.
So,
Twilight said, trying to restart the conversation.
I didn't know Rarity owned a palanquin.
She didn't, the human told her. We brought it with us. Twilight stared at him in confusion.
Why do you have a palanquin?
The division leader stared back, equally bewildered. So we can carry around Lady Rarity. Why else would we have one? Twilight shook her head, trying to understand the alien logic humans seemed to use was a lost cause. Instead, she needed to get back on track.
Never mind. I wanted to ask how the big is paying for everything. Not only would building enough barracks for all you be costly, but there's a list of other expenses to account for also.
The human thought for a moment. When we first discovered how to get here, we sent a few scouts to be sure we had the right place. They brought back several gems. We sold those and used the funds to bankroll the operation.
How much were those gems worth?
Unless they took a lot more than he had made it sound, the numbers still didn't add up. If I'm converting the currency right, then altogether they were about 2 million bits. He shrugged. Honestly, a couple of them we had to sell in pieces simply because jewels that size don't exist where we're from. Twilight nodded numbly. The only thought she could manage was that Rarity would be a billionaire if she ever set up shop, trading with whatever land these humans were from. At least, so long as the market held, assuming she had exclusive trade, and Twilight shook her head, managing to snap out of it. The advanced economics formulas it was trying to run.
So that's why your division is in charge of finances. Not only do you have access to the gems, but also the jewelers to make use of them. It also means that you still have secure contact with your homeland, and would have kept the source of those gems, and therefore your travels here a secret. If not, we'd be flooded by humans trying to strike it rich.
She paused, hardly noticing the wide-eyed stare the human was giving her.
However, the same would hold true if ponies realized they could become wealthy that easy. I would suggest that you don't tell this to any pony else.
The division leader simply nodded. Sure thing, Twilight. Twilight smiled.
Thanks for the answers, Mr.
With an embarrassing pause, she realized she didn't catch the human's name. Picking up the hint, he put a hand to his forehead. Oh yeah, we were interrupted last time. My name's Sir...
15! It's got to be 15!
Yelled a human from across the room. The division leader glared at the brief interruption. He turned back to finish introducing himself, but only gave a small, choked sound. It could have been several things that led to the sudden muteness, but Twilight thought it was probably her expression of pure rage. Twilight turned from him and stomped over to the human who had just spoken. His back was to her, so while he didn't see her approach, the rest of the group did. The growing looks of fear were their first clue that something wasn't right. He turned around, and Twilight gave him a look that would have shattered glass.
Taking in a deep breath, she tried and failed to ask calmly, "Just what the hey do you mean by that anyway?" The human simply stared, too frightened to look away. I, I just thought that the fabric would look better. Uh, I mean, number 6 is nice, but 15 just fits better. He gulped audibly. "Oh, please don't hurt me." He would be ashamed to say he whimpered, but there was really no other way to describe how he addressed the angry mare. Twilight stared at him for a moment more before the embarrassed set in, and she flushed bright red. Rarity had heard the commotion and hurried to her friend's side. "Are you all right, dear? I hope no pony said anything unkind." She shot a glare at the human Twilight had frightened, and he flinched. Twilight just shook her head. "No, I just misunderstood something he said," she sighed. "I know you wanted to talk, Rarity, but I've had a really long day. Right now, I really need to get home." "If that's what you want, then by all means go on. I'd hate to keep you." She paused. "Though would you ask one of you humans to return the tools they borrowed? Just whenever they can, bring them back is fine." "They are not my humans," Twilight thought, but she was too tired to argue. "Okay, thanks, Rarity. And thank you, Division Leader." Twilight still didn't know his name, but now she found it hard to care. She opened the door and walked out. "You're welcome," called the Division Leader as she left. "Oh, my name's Serial." The slam on the front door cut off the rest of his sentence. Twilight knew she was being rude, but she just wanted to go home, write Princess Celestia a letter, and relax with a good book. Maybe when she woke up tomorrow she'd find it was all a dream, and that Equestria wasn't really being invaded by a bunch of strange apes dedicated to her and all her friends. Her trip back to the library went without incident, thankfully, and she didn't even see the humans hanging around outside. For a brief moment she was at peace with herself, and then she heard voices from within the library, voices that didn't belong to any pony. Trying to stay calm, she counted off the 10 nearest stars, but astronomy failed to soothe her this time. They were in her library uninvited, doing Celestia knows what. She pulled open the door and stomped in, surprising Spike and the group of humans he was conspiring with. They smiled and moved, blocking her view of whatever they'd been doing. They looked about as innocent as the Cutie Mark Crusaders in the middle of a big mess, and Twilight was instantly suspicious. "Spike?" she asked. "Why is my library full of strangers? And why are you helping them with whatever they're doing?" Spike's eyes darted from side to side, trying to avoid Twilight's stare. "Well, it is a public library, and you left it open." A noise came from downstairs, and Twilight glared at the little dragon harder. "I suppose my lab is public, too?" Spike squirmed, but the division leader came to his defense. "It's actually our fault, Twilight. We convinced him to let us in. If you're going to blame anybody, blame me." Twilight transferred her look to the human, and he winced. After a moment, she stopped. She was just tired of the whole thing now. "Spike, go to your room. And the rest of you, just get out," she said in a monotone. "Get out and don't come back." Spike gave the leader a sympathetic look and began slowly climbing the stairs. The humans just stared at her in disbelief. Some looked like they were trying not to cry. But, one began, but his leader cut him off. "She gave us an order. We will follow it." His voice was calm, but Twilight could hear the pain he hid. It made her feel guilty, but it was necessary. The group started for the door, a few calling downstairs to their comrades. Twilight watched as they went, and then turned to clean up whatever mess they'd made. She was surprised to see that the library was almost spotless. The floor had been swept and mopped, and the unshelved books put away, and every shelf had been dusted. The only thing out of place was a collection of cardboard boxes and other odds and ends in the middle of the floor. Most of the boxes had been painted dull gray, and several had dials set into them. Twilight stared for a moment. "What's all this?" She hadn't expected a response, but the division leader overheard. "We were working on your costume for Pinky's party. Spike said you liked the Hitch Pony's Guide to the Galaxy, and so we wanted to make you a Mervyn outfit." He smiled. "We thought it would be funny." Twilight sat down, staring at the thoughtful gift, thinking about the work they'd done and the kindness they'd shown her. And then she thought about the way she'd treated them. Sure, they were strange and annoying, but they had looked shattered when she told them to leave. "You did all this for me? Why?" The human smiled sadly. "Because you taught us the magic of friendship, Twilight. You've touched every one of our lives and made them so much better. We'd do anything for you, even if that means leaving." Twilight's face flushed. She judged them without even giving them a chance. Hadn't she criticized all of her friends for doing the same thing to Psycics? They had all gotten along with their humans and seemed as happy as ever. Why hadn't she? Maybe, she began, working up the nerve to say more. Maybe all of you can stay for now. I'm not saying yes to your offer, but I'm not saying no either. Let's say my decision is contingent on a trial run, so I'm making an informed decision. The division leader just stared, hope starting to turn his lips into a smile. He leaned out the door and called to the rest of his humans. Boys and girls, we're back in the herd! The humans let out a cry of joy, and that beat even Dash's cheering section. They flooded back into the library and stood happily at attention. Twilight sighed, but their enthusiasm was infectious. She couldn't help but smiling. So, what do we do now? The division leader gestured, and one human handed him a checklist. Well, he began, examining the paper. We've set up some experiments and scientific devices from home in your lab, and there's also all of the books we brought with us to add to the library. We still need to work on your costume, and some of us wanted a chance to examine and measure your magic at work. Of course, if there's anything you'd rather do, that becomes priority, number 1. He showed her the list, and Twilight noticed it had an empty place in the top position. Twilight nodded, impressed by their organizational ability. I'd love to start looking through the books. I suppose the rest of you can keep working on the costume, but first, can any of you brew good tea? 2 humans saluted and moved to the kitchen, while the rest gathered around the half-finished costume. Twilight followed around the leader downstairs to a towering stack of books they'd put on the lab's landing. She stared hungrily at the new books, feeling her mouth water. The human was suggesting something, but she hadn't caught it. Sorry, but I didn't catch that. Or your name, now that I think about it. He chuckled and picked out a book. I was just saying you should probably start with this one. And as for my name, you can call me Seth. Twilight nodded and levitated the book out of his hand. Nice to meet you. She turned to go up the stairs and start reading, but a thought struck her. Say, who do the last 2 divisions follow? The division leader sighed moodily. The 24 bronies with him were feeling similarly unhappy. The day had started out fine, and even when things took a turn for the worse, they'd remained upbeat. But now the reality of their situation was sinking in, and nobody knew what to do. He fidgeted, trying to find a more comfortable spot on his rock. At least Princess Luna had seemed pleased by her division. He could only wish that things had gone so well for his team. Of course, everything had started off fine enough. The princess was cordial and willing to listen to their story. But damn is she unforgiving. I mean, it was a slip of the tongue. I just called her Celestia once. The air was still, dead, and even the most cheerful of the group had fallen silent by now. He sighed again, staring morosely at the lunar landscape. Yeah, that did not go as planned.